I want to thank you everyone for making tonight's July 14, 2020 Select Board meeting. My name is Peter Carlson. I'll be the chair tonight. Real quick, before we get started, I just have to read some remote participation guidelines. Pursuant to the Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, the various boards and committees representing the town of Grafton will conduct their public meetings and hearings via remote participation. No one in attendance of the public will be permitted. Just real quick, going over the protocols here, just to let you know that these meetings can be accessed from your personal computer and cell phones, and that please, that anything that you share on your screen in this meeting will be available to the public for public viewing, not only now, but later on in replay. Just some protocols for this remote public meeting. We're using the webinar feature here. Is that all participants who are entering the meeting must have their names please spelled out for each one who's attending, please. Thank you. Any computer participants are encouraged to click on the participants features in Zoom to view all participants and to view the question and answer function for those to pose questions on the bottom of the screen. As the chair, I will periodically ask Doreen DeFazio, our vice chair, to see if there's any members of the public who have any questions. Just to let you know that we changed this up last week to accommodate the better flow of discussion with the board members, in that we will go through board member discussion first, and once the board has completed its questions, we will then look to the question and answer session from the public, and the vice chair will read those questions into the record. I think that's all I have here to give an update on. And real quick, before we get into the agenda, there's just some slight changes this evening. We're going to pass over the MRC update before we get into the call to order and the rest of the meeting. But before we do that, see, I knew I was going to miss something. We need to do a roll call of the members who are here. So with the select board members, when I read, please answer in the affirmative that you're present. Colleen Roy.
Present.
Doreen DeFazio.
Doreen DeFazio, present.
Ed Prisby.
Present.
Matt Often.
Often is present.
Okay, for staff members, Rebecca Meekins.
Here.
Ray Mead.
Here.
Mark Haddad.
Present.
Irene Houle.
Unmute, Irene.
Yep, sorry about that. Irene Houle here.
Thank you. Dan Kushner.
I don't see him.
Yeah, okay. Heather McHugh.
Heather is absent this evening.
Okay. Barry Smith.
Barry Smith here.
Eric Swenson.
Eric Swenson is absent this evening.
Okay. Susan Fiacco.
Susan Fiacco here.
Chief Gothier. Chief, can you answer in the affirmative that you're here? Seems to be a problem with your audio, Chief. We'll go on to Karen Gobbin.
Karen Gobbin here.
And Dan Finn. Oh, I don't see him. Okay.
Sue Robbins here.
Sue, I'm sorry if I passed over your name, Sue. I meant to say that earlier. Thank you. All right. I have a couple of questions.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Mr. Haddad, what can I do for you?
I think I need to call the Finance Committee meeting to order.
Please
We're
go ahead.
posted and we have a quorum, so I'll call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of quick announcements before we get into the change in the schedule tonight. Grafton Public Library has started the contactless curbside pickup. For more information, please visit the library website at graftonlibrary.org, or you can call their main number at 508-839-4649 between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Just a quick reminder, residents are probably driving around and seeing road construction throughout Grafton. Just a reminder, the following roadways are under construction. Route 30 from 140 to the town line, Ray Street, Harrison Avenue, Leland Avenue, Prospect Street, Adams Road from Old Westboro Road to High Point Drive, and Christopher Drive. Just to remind everyone that construction crews will begin work approximately 7 a.m. and end around 3 p.m. Due to the high volume of traffic in these areas, delays are to be expected. Police details will be on site and detours will be set up. Every effort will be made to keep traffic moving as smoothly as possible during construction. That's all the announcements I have, and I don't believe we have any public comments. Is that right, Ms. Roy?
No, no public comments.
Thank you. All right, so real quick, I know I jumped ahead here earlier, forgot a couple of steps. We're going to pass over the MRC update tonight, just the last minute change in scheduling and availability. We will put this on the next future agenda item, either next week or the week after next. But first up, on our schedule today, we have Becca will go over vote to approve year-end transfer request, debt interest to debt principal. And just for the public to understand that this vote requires both the select board to take a vote and the finance committee to separately take a vote for this type of transfer. So I'm going to hand this over to Becca.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Peter said, this is something that came up this morning in a discussion I had with the accounting consultant that's working in the office since the departure of the town accountant. She noticed that we had a deficit in our debt principal line, and we have a surplus in our debt interest line. This is likely due to the fact that around the time that we were setting the FY20 budget, we were using estimates for our debt numbers for both the DPW and library projects. We were anticipating that we would get bids in right around the time of town meeting. So at that time, we made a decision to move forward with the estimates. We should have made the adjustment in May. We missed it. Thankfully, state law does allow a small window for towns to have their finance committees and boards of selectmen take a vote to approve a transfer after town meeting. So that's what this request is before you tonight. I apologize for the short notice. There's actually a deadline in state law, which happens to be tomorrow. So I'm very thankful that the finance committee was planning to be here tonight anyway. So tonight, my request is for both the finance committee and the select board to approve a transfer from debt interest to debt principal in the amount of $191,682.20.
All right, is there any questions from the select board? I'm not seeing any. Mr. Haddad, did you want to ask any questions of the finance committee?
Yeah, are there any questions from the finance committee on this transfer?
I have a question.
Yes, Irene.
Hey, I'm just curious. I'm assuming, Becca, that the amount is exactly equal. In other words, the exact deficit in principal is exactly equal to the surplus in interest. Is
Yes.
that correct? Okay. So does this mean that we are reducing our principal and thus our borrowing going forward?
It just means that the estimates that we were carrying initially were higher in principal and lower in interest. When we received the actual bids for the numbers for DPW and library, they were a little different than the estimates. So the adjustments should have been made in May, really at town meeting, but we unfortunately missed it, and the law does allow this window for the finance committee and the select board to take action.
Any other questions?
Are there any other questions from the finance committee? Mr. Chairman, is it all right if the Finance Committee votes first?
Oh, Sue has a question.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, Mark. I was waiting for Dan to come on board because I believe we did not have a quorum.
We do have a quorum. There's 4 of us here.
There needs to be 4?
No,
Yes.
there's 7 members. There's 7 members currently on the Finance Committee. The charter says the quorum is the majority of those present, excluding vacant positions. So there are 7 members of the FinCom. There are 4 of us here. We have a legal quorum.
Thank you, Mark.
Now Dan
So,
is
Mr.
here, so we have 5.
We have 5.
So we're good anyway.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Sorry,
Mr. Chairman, is it all right if the FinCom votes first?
Mr. Haddad, before you do that, one of your members is waiting for a link to join the meeting. Dan Kusher didn't have a clickable link and having some difficulty, so
I'm in now.
thank you, Dan. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Haddad, I didn't know if Mr. Kusher may have a question.
Dan, do you have any questions on this transfer?
Nope.
All right, therefore, I accept the motion from the Finance Committee to approve the transfer as presented. Did I hear a motion?
So moved?
Is there a second?
Second,
Thank you. All right, Finance Committee by roll call.
Robbins, aye.
Irene Hall, aye.
Kusher, aye.
Barry Smith, aye.
Mark Haddad, aye. I think that makes us unanimous, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay. At this point in time, the select board doesn't have any questions. I'll entertain a motion.
I move the board vote to instruct the town accountant to transfer $191,682.20 from the debt interest line to the debt principal line for the fiscal year ending in June 30, 2020.
Second,
I have a motion made and seconded from the select board. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those by roll call vote. Ms. Roy?
Roy, aye.
Mr. Fazio?
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Prisby?
Frisbee, aye.
Mr. Often?
Often aye.
Peter Carlson's aye. Declare the motion carried unanimous 5-0. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate that. Okay. Becca, all set with that? All right. Moving on to financial policy discussion with the Finance Committee. So a few weeks ago, we received some draft policies from Finance Committee outlining some changes. I wanted to have this opportunity for both boards to perhaps ask questions of each other to be able to answer them here. Becca, did you want to, I think there was an update that you wanted to give to the committee with regards to these policies and some other reports?
Yeah, if I could, I just wanted to make the board, well, both the Finance Committee and the Select Board aware that we sent our financial policy as well as our debt policy to our town auditor, our accounting consultant, and our financial advisor, and asked all 3 of them to take a look at them again and make any recommendations to us. We also sent the Finance Committee the recommended addition of the OPEB section to them. We are still awaiting feedback. Unfortunately, the town auditor was on vacation, so I don't have feedback from them available this evening, but I'm hoping to get it by the end of the week, and then I would like to be able to bring those recommendations before the board at a later meeting to make any adjustments necessary.
All right, so all of you have had a copy of the report now from Finance Committee, so I'll open this up to the Select Board for any questions that they have for Finance Committee. Mr. Prisby.
Yeah, sorry. So just let's assume for the sake of argument that I didn't get to everything in the 188-page packet this week. What are we talking about right now as far as policy changes that FinCom thinks need to be addressed?
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Please, Mr. Haddad.
we added, Mr. Prisby, we added 2 sections to the policy. We added a debt policy or updated the debt policy and reviewed that. And then we added an OPEB policy to the current policy. That was the only change. We thought that the rest of the policies were in good shape, but it makes sense to review them periodically so that if we need to make changes, we can. And I went through them this morning, and I was going to make a recommendation to the select board this evening and the finance committee that we make one change to the budget section of the policy. Under section B of our financial policies, it requires that the town administrator receive guidance from the select board prior to starting the budget process to give guidance. I'd like to recommend that we amend that section and add the finance committee to that as well, so that it's a joint meeting between the select board and the finance committee to meet with the town administrator to set the budget guidance. You know, ultimately we have to review the budget with the select board and make a recommendation to town meeting. And it seems to me that it would make sense that we participate in setting the guidance prior to the establishment of the budget. So to answer your question, Mr. Prisby, those are the main changes adding the OPEB policy. And I'd like to ask the select board and the finance committee to consider adding another section to the policy to allow the finance committee to participate in budget guidance development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Any other questions that the select board may have? Mr. Haddad or anyone from the finance committee, my question is will you provide those substantive changes to section B, number 3, with your proposed changes prior to adoption?
I could draft something, Mr. Chairman, and get it to the board to review.
Okay.
If the select board is interested in that, and if the finance committee is interested in that. Obviously, I haven't had a chance to discuss it with my committee either.
Mark, thank you. Mr. Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was interested in having that discussion prior to the budget as well. In the debt policy, in the policy implementation, there's a annual goal setting that is called out. And in that goal setting, it says prior to the start of the preparation of the annual budget, the town administrator will invite discussion with the select board, finance committee, and department heads to discuss operating expenditure and debt service goals, including maintaining of and improvement of our bond ratings. So that already kind of exists, I think.
I'd like to see it clarified, though.
So fine, I get it. It sounds like we have some additional input coming from our auditor, and I would welcome that input. I'm wondering if we schedule a working subcommittee to kind of thoroughly review these, and it sounds like we need another meeting for this. Because I had a couple of things, for example, in our the section around stabilization, we've added an additional stabilization account for special education for the schools, and I'm wondering if that shouldn't be included. So there's I think some additional minor tweaks probably that we're looking at if we want to really do a thorough job of reviewing these and making sure that we are behind them.
Any other questions or discussion? Mr. Prisby.
Yeah, one thing I wanted some input on from FinCom, and I think from a couple people in the room that have served on CIPC, was the capital plan that's submitted annually has a section for procedural review, and it says the town administrator shall annually submit a capital improvement program to the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee at least 150 days before the start of the fiscal year. I'm wondering, that sentence bothers me a little bit because it's basing the submission of the plan on the fiscal year as opposed to submission of the budget to town meeting. It also doesn't include CIPC in there. Maybe that's something else that we want to give a little bit of thought as to what our policy is for timing and submission into whom, because having spent a little bit of time on CIPC, I think one of the most frustrating things for me was not knowing when I was going to get information, whether or not the input was going to be valued by the select board and the town administrator, and just sort of feeling like you're on this committee to review the plan and the process, but at the same time sort of being outside the process. So at this point, I think I'd like, at least in the policy, a commitment to including CIPC in the process and getting that done before the decision's already made. Because if the decision's made and you're just giving something to CIPC to rubber stamp, then there's no point to CIPC.
Mr. Smith, I'm sorry, Mr. Haddad, that's your committee member. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. To Mr. Frisbee, if I may, the 150 days is out of the charter. So that is by statute, I guess you'd say that it has to be 150 days. So I think if we want to amend the policy, we would probably have to amend the charter if we want to have it so many days before town meeting. But I agree with you 100% that the CIPC should be part of the process.
Can someone help me with the math? 150 days before July 1st is February 1st?
January,
January?
end of January.
End of January. Okay. And I think the way we do the budget is the budget has to be to FinCom 90 days before. Okay. So I guess that works then. Okay. Never mind. As far as the timing goes anyway.
Any other questions? Mr. Smith,
Not on this particular one. Maybe I should hold it.
we're talking about the financial policy discussion. There's
Yeah.
something else that's on your mind?
Okay.
I
I
would
would
go
ask
off
for
until we
a-
get to that agenda item, Barry.
No, it's on the policies. I would ask for a very simple global edit of these documents. Replace Board of Selectmen to Select Board. And also, can we apply a date stamp to these documents? So we know what's old, what's new, what's current.
So, Mr. Smith, on the signature page, there's a date in which the board last adopted this, which was on or about November 16th of 2010. Is that sufficient for you?
I'll take it, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Fazio?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one thought is all of these recommendations and ideas, I'm sure this will be done, but it would be great to have them all in writing, everybody's input, and then sent out to these two committees so that we can review them and maybe, workshop and add on. And the way I kind of see this too is, this can be ongoing input from both committees. So, even if we start making changes now, that doesn't stop us from continuing this conversation. So I just wanted a little input on the recommendation from the Finance Committee of the OPEB policy, and more just for my own knowledge, just because I'm not very familiar and we don't seem to have one in place. So if someone on the committee would just kind of explain, why the recommendation, why you think this is a good recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Please, Mr. Haddad.
Yes, Mr. Fazio, the GASB 7475 from the Government Accounting Standards Boards has now given guidance that municipalities need to plan for retiree health insurance and to make sure that we have sufficient funds in the event that the town goes bankrupt or there's a problem financially, that retiree health insurance is covered. It's not mandatory, but it is something that they are recommending strongly. When bond rating companies come in to look at the town, they look to see if you have an OPEB policy. If you don't have an OPEB policy or have created the OPEB trust, it hurts your opportunity to upgrade your bond rating. So it's crucial to the town, if we want to get to that AAA area or AAA rating, that we come up with a policy and we adhere to that policy. This is a good first step. And as we're able to come up with financing sources to get to our ARC, we would amend the policy and try to do that. But I think it's crucial for the town's financial health that we have the OPEB policy in place, especially if we go out to bond and we want to look at getting a bond rating upgrade. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you very much.
Ms. Wu?
No, I'm all set. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
That was me touching the screen as I was reading through the OPEB policy. Sorry.
Oh, understood. All right. Any other questions? Mr. Frisbee?
Just one. In the policy suggestion, paragraph number 5 reads that the town shall obtain an actuarial analysis of OPEB liability every 2 years. Do we know when the last time was that we did an actuarial analysis of OPEB?
Boy.
Chairman,
Mr. Haddad, you're kind of distorted there with your comments. I couldn't tell if you need.
I apologize. To answer it, can you hear me now?
Yes.
To answer Mr. Prisby's question, you're supposed to do it every 2 years. So I'd ask the assistant town administrator when the last time we did the OPEB actuarial study.
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yes, Ms. Meekins.
So the last study was done last year. So we're looking at doing another one this coming fiscal year. When I say last year, I mean FY19. So we'll be looking to do one in 21. Actually, in reading this, I would it's a every 2 years is a requirement of the law as far as I'm aware, and I would actually just write into this policy to be consistent with state law, so that if for whatever reason they made it a requirement that you do it every 1 year, that our policy would still be consistent with state law.
Any other questions? All right, so just to follow up on next steps, so some members have some comment revisions that they would like to make. We've asked some questions today about what are the major changes from the one adopted 10 years ago to what this one will do for us today. Going forward, there was a request to set up 2 working groups to maybe go over the changes and then present at a future meeting. I think this is a good first step. So is that the wish of the committee at this time for select board to set up a subgroup? Okay, I've seen some nods. I've seen some thumbs up. There we go. I like that. Thank you. Mr. Haddad, I didn't know if you wanted to pull your committee for that as well, and then we'll figure out next steps and put on a future agenda item, set up a committee to work with your group.
I think it's a great idea. Is anybody on the finance committee opposed to setting up a working group to do this?
No.
So I think we're in favor, Mr. Chairman, and we'd be very interested in working with the select board. So how many members from the finance committee would you like us to designate?
However many is necessary. I'm going to see if the select board maybe just wants one, or if there are 2 members who want to serve. But I figure, Mr. Alston, did you have a suggestion?
I want to volunteer.
Okay. So I think at our next meeting, we'll put on the agenda to appoint a single member, unless the select board wants to add another member. I'm not seeing any indication that that's what they want to do. So, Mr. Haddad, we'll just appoint one person next week.
Okay.
And get that going, and then we'll hear back from select board reports about when those developments occur. And when we get the report back from the auditor, finance manager, and the accountant, we'll make those available. Actually, we'll probably have Ms. Meekins do a report for us on those developments, and then we'll have those distributed to be able to ask questions, and then make any decision that we see fit afterwards. So probably looking at least a few weeks at the minimum, maybe a few extra weeks maximum to get all this done. Does that work for you guys?
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, if it's okay with the members of the finance committee, I'd be more than happy to work with Mr. Alston on it.
Okay. All right, that works. All right, is there anything else that we need to go over with the finance committee this evening? All right, Mr. Haddad, I think we've concluded this part of our meeting with you guys. I want to thank you very much for making it out tonight, everybody, on a Tuesday. And we will be following up with you in a short while about next steps.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll adjourn the meeting of the finance committee and wish you good luck with the rest of your meeting.
Thank you.
Mark, do you need a motion to adjourn?
Nope.
Okay.
Chair can adjourn the meeting.
Yep.
Power.
I like that. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you. All right. So next up, we were talking about at our last meeting about the 7 applicants that we've received for the Board of Health vacancy. Tonight, we've asked the chair or someone from the Board of Health to attend our meeting to have a discussion on, how the board would like to see going forward in filling that vacancy. So This evening, I have Ms. Govan here, Chair of the Board of Health, here to answer any questions or give us an update and maybe share with us what their Board of Health's desires is and discuss how the Select Board would like to move forward with that appointment process. Ms. Govan?
All right, well, thank you. Appreciate you having me here. Excited and was surprised to actually get 7 applicants. I don't know if that's a record for a board or committee, but we're very happy to see a large turnout of applicants. Just in the past, we've had it for the most part where the Board of Health would review the applicants. Typically, we only had like 1 or 2 when we had an opening. So we'd have the applicants come in, we'd interview them, give them time to ask us questions, and then we'd make our recommendation to the Select Board to say, out of those applicants, here's who we think would be the best fit for the board. And then the Select Board would do their interviews and make the ultimate appointment of who would be on the board. So knowing there's 7 applicants this time, obviously we want some type of collaborative process still, where we have, as the Board of Health, some opportunity to interview, even if it's not all 7, like reviewing the applications, maybe narrowing down the pool and either interviewing the applicants and providing a recommendation or 2 to the Select Board, or we talked about potentially, do we do almost like a little, like a subcommittee or something between the Board of Health and the Select Board to say, okay, instead of having applicants come to us and the applicants go to the Select Board, is there a way to kind of combine it together to streamline it? So we're willing to obviously do whatever in terms of the process.
Okay. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Govan? So does the board want to give a direction on how it would like to proceed? Ms. Roy?
I really like the idea of having you guys interview all 7 candidates. You guys know what your board is looking for, and then to make a recommendation of 2 or 3 that we can then narrow down and bring in, and we'll talk to them if that works for everybody else.
All right. So does anyone on my board have any more questions? Ms. Roy's suggestion? Mr. Prisby?
I just want to make sure we're doing it according to how the bylaw reads. There's nothing preventing us from doing that, right? I mean, I would generally agree. I don't want to micromanage the operation of the Board of Health. It's a lot of 7 applicants is a lot of applicants. But I want to make sure that we can do that.
Okay. Ms. Govan, have you read the bylaw? Are you aware of the appointment process? I know the Select Board appoints this position.
Yeah, I mean, nothing to my knowledge would prevent us from doing that. Like I said, we've done it in the past. We've just never had 7 applicants. I think the last time we actually weren't involved at all, and the Select Board just at the time appointed 2 individuals to spots without us even knowing that it was going to happen. So hence the reason, obviously, we want it this time to be more collaborative again.
Understood. Mr. Fazio?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, following up with what Mr. Prisby said, so our board would still need to interview all 7 candidates as well, which I think that's what Ed was getting at. So we would have a recommendation from the Board of Health, but we couldn't just dismiss the other 4 candidates. We would still be interviewing, and we would just have a recommendation from the Board of Health. Is that correct?
To my knowledge, that's how it's been, because there's nothing that says if we recommend one individual, even if there are only 2 applicants, that the Select Board has to appoint that individual just because we recommended them. So
I feel better with that. That's fine.
Does anybody have any other questions? So just recap one more time what exactly we are doing and how this process is going to work, please.
All right. So what we discussed is the Board of Health will review and interview the 7 applicants.
Yep.
We will provide a recommendation. If the Select Board wants, we can provide 1, 2, 3, maybe, I guess, depends how many you would like us just looking quickly at the applicants, I can see us potentially having more than one individual that we would likely want to recommend without obviously meeting them yet in person or anything. And then it would be the select board that would then have the opportunity to interview. They want all of the candidates, take our recommendation, and either you can choose to go with one of our recommendations or choose someone else.
Okay. So the goal would be to have still seven of these candidates at one of our future meetings for the appointment process, but we're going to take the recommendation of the Board of Health as part of who they recommend. That agree? Okay. Okay.
All right.
All right. Do we have any other questions for Ms. Garvin? No, I think that's it. Thank you very much for attending. Appreciate it. Good luck with going through the
Thank you.
candidates, and
We
we'll look
appreciate
forward
it.
to your recommendation, of course.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
All right. Next up on our agenda, a couple things to kind of go through here. We have a select board appointment election worker for Greg Marr. Do I have a motion?
I move the board vote to appoint Greg Marr as an election worker.
I have a motion made and seconded for the appointment. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor by roll call vote. Ms. Roy?
Roy, aye.
Mr. Fazio?
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Prisby?
Yeah.
Mr. Often?
Often I.
Mr. Carlson's aye. I declare the motion carried unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to new business. So the first thing we have up here is vote to sign the purchase and sale agreement with GSX Ventures for 8 Pine Street. Ms. Meekins, did you want to give a quick update to this?
Sure, I'll make this brief because I know the board is very aware of this process that we've been through for that parcel. So this is the P&S purchase and sale agreement for 8 Pine Street between the town and GSX. They're the proposer that was chosen after proposals were submitted, and we went through a process with Grafton Historical and Mass Historical. Their proposal is for 307 units of housing and a retail component of about 11,000 square feet. This P&S was included in the RFP, so only minor changes have been made with respect to dates and dollar amounts. It's a requirement of procurement law to include draft P&Ss in all RFPs. So everybody pretty much knew what they were getting into when we started the process. There is a 300-day entitlement period per the RFP. So GSX is going to have the opportunity to do some formal engineering on the site, do some testing. They have to submit an application to a land use department so many days into the entitlement period. And then after the 300 days, we'll close within 30 days of that date, which puts us in June of 2021. So that's the goal.
All right. All right, so any questions for Ms. Meekins on the purchase and sale agreement for 8 Pine Street? Mr. Often?
Yeah, Ms. Meekins, so we've got the 300-day and then the 30-day close. So we would receive proceeds upon closing. Is that right?
That's correct. So there is, hold on 1 second, let me just get the exact amount. So there is a deposit that they have to put down within 5 days of the board signing this agreement in the amount of $60,000 roughly. And then the balance of what's owed will be delivered by wire after closing.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, if there's no other questions, I'll entertain a motion.
I move the board vote to sign the purchase and sales agreement with O'Connell Development Group Incorporated and GSX Ventures LLC for the sale of 8 Pine Street in the amount of $1,725,000.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor by roll call vote. Ms. Roy?
Roy, aye.
Mr. Fazio?
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Prisby?
Frisbee, aye.
Mr. Often?
Often I.
And Mr. Carlson here, aye. I declare the motion carried unanimous. All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Fazio?
I'm wondering if the board would consider taking discussion, the fire chief transition plan earlier in the agenda, since we have asked Chief Gothier to be here this evening, and he willingly did so. And just to be mindful of his time, you know, I know we have a lot of items on the agenda, but if it's possible to move it up sooner, I just think that would be the right thing to do.
Yeah, Mr. Fazio, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to make sure I gave the public enough time to know that this was later in the agenda, and I do appreciate you bringing that up. Is the rest of the committee fine with that? And we'll take up the fire chief transition plan? Okay, so we're going to move on to number 7 under discussion with fire chief transition plan. Just real quick, we have Chief Gothier here from the fire department, and I believe Mr. Mead is here as well to provide some commentary and some input and some questions. All of you received a copy of the transition plan for the fire chief position from the town administrator's office. I would like to just perhaps maybe open this up to Ms. Meekins to give maybe just a quick update from the last meeting of where we are today, and then I'll open it up to the committee for questions or concerns on the transition plan proposed.
Sure. So just from the last meeting to tonight, we have pulled down the ads as requested by the board from all of the posting locations. They've been temporarily suspended, is what we've been telling applicants that have been calling. And the memo that you have in your packet and corresponding documentation that's included in the packet online is essentially sort of a timeline of where we were, where we started in December of 2018 with the MRI report to where we are today. And then it also includes some next steps in terms of what the best way forward is from here. So.
Thank you, Ms. Meekins. So any questions from the board regarding what was proposed as a transition plan at this time? All right, we're going to start with Mr. Fazio and then Mr. Prisby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've read this transition plan in great detail, and before we get into this memo and transition plan, I would like to give Chief Gothier, if he wants to, an opportunity to speak. And I think it's important for our board to just listen, because he's been on the job for 47 years. And so I would just like to hear his, I would just like to hear what he has to say and see. He also has a copy of the report. So if there's suggestions, if there's things this board is missing, you know, I'd like to start there.
Mr. Gothier? Oh, still having a problem with audio there, sir.
I'll try and do it on my phone.
I could barely hear you.
Okay.
Very faint.
Hear me any better now?
Chief, I'm still having a hard time hearing you. I don't know if the rest of my committee is having difficulty as well. Maybe it's just me.
Chief, I think you just have to turn the volume up a little bit. We can hear you, but it's low.
My volume's all the way up.
Okay,
Um,
I can hear you.
I haven't seen the transition report.
There you go.
I wasn't given the transition report, so I haven't seen it to review it. So my biggest questions at the time were doing a smooth transition, but where did that leave me? You're hiring a fire chief and we're going to transition, but nobody could actually tell me what my position was going to be. That was a big concern of mine. Still, where does it go? And it's very discouraging at this point. I mean, not having answers. I mean, I was told that it would, back in December 30th of 2019, when I met with Tim in his office after I got out of work, we discussed staying on, and he said to me, you know, I want you to stay on 3 years, 5 years, whatever it takes. You're a legacy in town. And I told him that I only had 2 years left, and that's all I could do. He says, you know, I'll get you more money. I'll get you the equipment you need. I'll get you a retirement. I said, well, if you can get me a retirement, God bless you, because I don't think you can under the Worcester County retirement. And that was the last I heard of it. So, never heard any more about the Worcester County retirement, so I just figured that wasn't going to happen. As for getting more money, that wasn't never proposed to me. As for getting more equipment, it was all taken out of my operating budget and put on an override without ever being discussed with me. That was something that we built up over the past 20 years, building up our replacement equipment account. And talking with Ed Prisby and Matt Austin, who were on the finance committee, know that this is what we had. And we always ranged it in between $90,000 to $100,000. And we replaced certain pieces of aging equipment. And we did it over time. The last biggest thing I did was my Scott air packs. I had 48 to replace. I did it over an 8-year period. I mean, that saved us. I could have put out and asked for $450,000 to replace them all. The problem with that is, you get that, they all expire at the same time. So now I have to go back to the town and ask for more money, and probably then it would be $700,000. We did it over time, and now my oldest air pack is 8 years old. So I mean, it's working. My turnout here, NFPA compliance says it's only good for 10 years. So I have to have coat, pants, boots, helmet, gloves, hoods. I mean, those are all good for 10 years. We're at a point now where they're actually looking at to do 2 sets of turnout gear for firefighters, because when you come back from a structure fire, they want you to wash it immediately. And for some people, you wash it, you're out of service for a couple of days because you have to have it dry. So some of my important, people that show up all the time, I've been getting them into a second set. It's good for 3 or 4 years, but if they go to a structure fire, they have a second set of gear that they can use. Again, that was taken out of the operating budget, put in the override. My view on that, I believe it was a political thing. I didn't agree with it. It was never brought to us to do that. Maybe we could have taken other cuts in the budget, but we never met on this year's budget. So it just gets very discouraging after time that people just take stuff away from us. I mean, and I'll point one other thing out, and this is the last thing that I point out. $67,500 was taken out of our operating budget for this past budget to pay for other articles on a special town meeting. That was never discussed, never even told to us. My secretary asked me if I knew anything about it because we saw it on the warrant. We knew nothing about it, but it was just taken out of our budget. I mean, to me, it should have been discussed with me prior to that and saying, hey, we need this, can we take this money? Money was just taken. I mean, I don't know if that happens with other departments, but I worry about the fire department, and that's my job. So, it just gets very disheartening after a while. Was I planning on retiring? Yeah, I was planning on retiring, but things happen, and I gave you July 31st. I mean, Peter Carlson reached out to me. We had a nice discussion, and I've had a few days to go over what we discussed. And at this point, I do have a proposal, but I don't want to spew it out in public. I feel it should go into executive session, and I would give you my proposal at that point. And it's not a bad proposal. I mean, at this point, I've reached out to certain people, and we can go from there.
All right, thank you, Chief. So Mr. Fazio, I believe he answered that question for you as well. I just want to give Mr. Prisby an opportunity to ask a question to the Chief next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mickey, thanks for being here tonight. Sorry about the position that you find yourself in, and sorry that it's come to the point where you have to have this discussion in an open meeting. You said a minute ago that you had a conversation with Tim about him wanting you to stay on. And at that point, you felt like you had another couple of years left. Do I have that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
I turned 65 in December of 2021.
2021?
Yes.
Okay. So basically about a year and a half from now, you'll be 65.
Correct.
Okay. When was that conversation? You said that was the last you heard of it. When was the last you heard of it? How long ago was that?
Yep. When we discussed that was December 30th, 2019, at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon after I got out of work in his office.
Could you be more precise? I'm kidding.
4:35.
Okay. So that part I think is important for the board to know when we talk about our timeline, because there was the transition plan, Mickey, that you haven't seen. We got in our packet, and it's probably, I don't think it contains anything that you don't already know, but there was a piece of it that was left out, which is there's a timeline that's involved with the decisions that were made by the consulting groups and by the committee. And then all of a sudden it's sort of fast forward to where we are now. And I think I'd like to flesh out what happened over the past 6 months and why there wasn't a further conversation with you about this. Transition plans, as people know, involve incidents of actual transition. The present establishment working with what they want to come forward from here in order to affect that end result without getting what we have now, which is a little bit of discord and certainly on my part, a little bit of alarm, because I'm not sure what your proposal is going to be. I'm not sure if we can accept it yet, not knowing what it is. But I do know that you were not, I don't think you're planning on retiring as of July 31st. I think what I heard you say is you knew it was coming. Now it's July 31st and it's you. We're not going to have a fire inspector, and I'm not sure about the rest of the chain of command, to be frank with you. So I think that answers the first part of my question. The second part of my question is you mentioned $67,500 that was taken out of your budget. It's been a crazy spring, and I don't specifically remember that, but what was that number? What did that number entail in your budget, Mickey?
That was out of my personnel account, and it was paid for bills for COVID expenses under the special town meeting.
Okay.
A bunch of articles, and if you added it all up, it was $67,500.
What was that budgeted for? What personnel was that budgeted for?
I would imagine the only thing I was told was personnel, because that's what I saw on the warrant. So that would be salaries, I would believe.
I wonder if that was that the fire inspector byline that we don't have a fire inspector now? No. Becca, do you know what that was for, Becca?
Becca can answer that. I can't. I mean, all I know was $67,500 out of personnel account.
Here, those are all the questions I have for Mr. Gothier.
Thank you, Mr. Prisby. Anyone else have any questions? Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, Chief Gothier, thanks for being here tonight. I just had a basic question, and I'm just wondering if at any point you had clarity around, like operationally and also command-wise, when we brought in a new chief, how was that supposed to work? When I think about a transition plan, we think about roles and responsibilities and how those roles and responsibilities over time transition from the current chief to a new chief. So from an administrative standpoint, from just at operations, you show up to an incident. Was there any discussion about how that was ever supposed to work with you?
No, that's the whole point. I mean, when you can only have one fire chief.
Right.
That's it. I mean, fire chief is in charge. I mean, that's it. That's the way it works. And so, I mean, there is a process you can go through. I mean, I know when I was appointed fire chief, I took over the day after Ray Gilmet retired. His last day was June 30th, and I was taking over on July 1st. And I was appointed in April of 2002 at the selectmen's meeting. Russ Connor was the town administrator at the time. My name was brought forward, and it was approved by the Board of Selectmen. But again, I wasn't going to be fire chief until Ray Gilbert retired. And that's, we all knew that. So I worked with Ray those few months. I mean, I was already kind of in the administration and working with him anyway, so I had a little bit of knowledge on it. I've worked the budget before with the equipment because I always took care of that. So, I mean, yeah, I had an inclination. So, I mean, it was working the rest of it and then working with my secretary, Cheryl Barker. I mean, she was a great help and moving forward. So, that was a transition period, but everybody knew what was going on.
Right.
It was cut and dry. I mean, that was my whole question. Where did that lead me? And some people, you know, well, we're hiring a fire chief, you know, and he's the fire chief, he's the fire chief. And, well, that's fine. But as far as I'm concerned, the way I feel is I'm going to retire. I'm going to retire as the fire chief, and I'm going out with my head held high with no regrets. And I've given the town 47 and a half years of my life. Actually, I've given more of it because my father was a firefighter when I was born. So, I mean, I'm 63 and a half years in the Grafton Fire Department. That's been my whole life. July 4th, 4th of July, I left the cookout to go to a fire in the town of Westboro. No, I left my family. I mean, so, but that's what I did, you know, and that's what I still do. I mean, I'm still going to fires. I'm still getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to answer a call. I mean, because that's what I do. I mean, do I do it for the money? Absolutely not. It's in my heart. I mean, that's my passion, and that's what I thought. So, I mean, I wanted to go out on my terms at this point. I didn't want to be, you know, pushed out the door and say, have a nice day, see you later, your services are done. And that's just the way I feel was going to happen. But like I said, I'd like to go into executive session. I have a proposal. I can alleviate some of the issues that you have, Ed. I mean, with inspector and this whole thing, but I feel it needs to go in this route first before it goes to the public. So,
Sure. Okay, thanks.
I'm more than happy to share that with you tonight.
All right, I just had one other question, and that is, in our email exchange, you had indicated that Tim said that you could apply for the job once it was posted, I guess. My understanding is that you could never be a full-time fire chief with also a full-time job that you currently have, right? Is that accurate?
Well, we'll go back to the beginning of 2019, right after December of 2018, when we had a conference call with myself, Tim, and MRI, and he discussed everything. And after that meeting was over, I asked Tim, I said, so in this process, where does that leave me? And he couldn't answer me that night. So 2 weeks later, we met on the budget for the following year, and he said to me, he goes, you know, you took me by surprise, but to answer your question where that leaves you, he says, I would hope that you would apply for the position and be in the mix of it. And I was speechless, and I took my parents' advice that we don't always do. They said, if you don't have anything good to say, you don't say it at all. That was one of those times I took my parents' advice. So I was shell-shocked. I mean, a job that I've had for, at the time, almost 17 years, and now I'm going to apply for the job. You know, I'm sorry. To me, it was a slap in the face. I was good enough to do it all these years, but now, I mean, could have been offered? Maybe, you know, but that's the way the town's going, and I understand that. I mean, right now, I wouldn't take it now. I mean, I have nothing to gain, more to lose, and I've talked to Peter about that, because I have a full-time job. I have a 401. To take a full-time job now for 1 year or 15, 17 months, I'd lose money in the long run, because I can keep continuing to work at my present employer and get my max in Social Security, and I can work another 3 or 4 years. So, I mean, if you wanted to pay me a few $100,000, then yeah, we can sit down and talk, but I'm not looking for that. But like I said, I do have something that I would like to propose to you. I'll come up with a proposal because nobody's come up with a proposal with me. So it's been a lot of thinking this over. I mean, I'm glad Peter called me. Last week has been a very humbling and week. I've had outreach from so many people that they brought tears to my eyes, and I'll tell you that. I mean, just the amount of support that I have everywhere. I mean, I got a call from Florida on Sunday from Representative George Peterson, you know, thanking me for all the years. I mean, that means a lot to me. I mean, I was never expecting any of this. I've had more people come to me, talk to me, whatever they can do, they have my back. I mean, I think I said it's humbling. The town manager from Medway sent out an accolade that brought tears to my eyes. I choked up trying to read it. And that's a town manager from Medway that I've known when he worked in Sutton. He worked in Walpole, but I've known him for many years. And I'm kind of disappointed. I mean, the only thing I've gotten from our administration is a text message. And that was on Tuesday at 9:24. I'm being precise, Ed. I got your letter. Can we talk about this? No phone calls, no nothing, no outreach. So it kind of says, I know where I stand. But I got to say that the townspeople have been very supportive of me. I have some officers on the fire department reach out to me about what they hope that I would do, and they want me to stay and everything else. I said, well, it's going to take a few things for that to happen. And if I can make it work, then I will discuss that with you.
Thank you, Chief.
Does any of the members have any questions? Ms. Roy, do you have anything? Okay. Mr. Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a question. I just have a comment. Where to start? I have, again, this whole packet in front of me, as the board, the rest of the board does, and our public does. I've been involved with this from the beginning, and I think that I'll say that the level of detail and transparency of how I feel what we've done, from starting with town meeting, with the MRI report and having that pass and going through that process, and then hiring a fire study committee and going through that process, I think has been very well done. Unfortunately, what we have not done is discuss it with the most important person, who is our key stakeholder, which is Chief Gauthier. And we can say that there was conversation, but not enough stakeholder engagement. And so, with that, Chief Gauthier, I'm looking forward to your proposal, and I thank you for your 47 years of service for our fire department. And I have also gotten a number of phone calls so I can't even imagine how much your phone's been ringing off the hook, because I've received phone calls of people who support you as well. And, I thought our plan, reading through this report, reading through the memos, our plan was pretty solid, with the understanding that you were in the loop. And so my apologies for that. I would also like to hear from maybe Ray Mead, since he's on the call, of, just input of the fire study committee too. And because it says in this memo that the title will be determined by the person that we hire and Mr. Gauthier's willingness to stay on board too. So I think there was an understanding, at least from my perspective, that we would never have two fire chiefs, that we would have Chief Gauthier as our fire chief until he retired, and then we'd have someone else who came in and trained under him. So there seems to be an incredible misunderstanding with that. And like I said, stakeholder engagement is probably the missing link here. And, I appreciate the fact that you're willing to have this discussion with us so we can move forward and figure out where to go from here.
Thanks, Mr. Fazio. Mr. Mead, did you have anything you wanted to add from Ms. Fazio's request?
Well, the thing that I want to add is that, the fire study committee worked for a year. And one thing that I said at the beginning of the whole process for the fire study committee was that it is not our job to discuss current administration, current issues, or current problems. And I think, Peter, you remember that we discussed that. And our job was to take the MRI study and to come up with a plan or a solution from that MRI study to, I guess, resolve the MRI study. And that's what we did. As far as transitions and things like that, that's nothing that we ever discussed at our meetings, never. Hey, I've served with Mickey shoulder to shoulder for many years, and he's a damn good firefighter. I can say that honestly. And I think that if this can get worked out, it can get worked out. But the MRI study and our study both came to the conclusion as to what the board saw and what the board voted on, and what we voted on unanimously was that we need a full-time fire chief. How we get to that point is up to the board and is up to Tim. It's not up to the fire study committee. It really had nothing to do with us. So that's what I have.
I want to just say here, thank you, Mr. Mead, for the comments. I did serve with Mr. Mead in that committee for approximately 1 year, almost the day. And part of what we weren't doing is getting involved with, how do you get to point A to point B, but what are the priorities is what he said. And that's basically what that report was talking about. These are things that in that report were inevitable to the Grafton Fire Department. And to speak to Mr. Fazio, how we transitioned into that eventually, I think you're right. We did not have the right key stakeholder in the conversation. And I want to also, I can point the finger at myself in this as well, in saying that maybe I needed to advocate more while I was on the board over the past year. We've had subsequent conversations. I will say that the one I had last week, I was pleasantly and somewhat encouraged by Chief Gauthier's conversation with me, and I hope that he's able to bring his plan to town officials and somehow get it to us for us to review, hopefully in the near future. And how, to Mr. Mead's point, how we navigate a smoother transition in a place where our call fire department can maintain its status and have the representation to a lot of people. Mr. Mead can attest to this, who have given this town for many, many, many years, a department that was pretty self-sufficient for a number of years. And just with all the changes and regulations we mentioned in reports in the MRI report, the department, we recognize, I think, as a town, that the department needs some sort of full-time assistance. And I believe that that is something that we can get to and be in a transition period for however much time we have with our existing chief. But that's really just all I want to say tonight. And I also wanted to thank you, Chief, for coming in tonight, unless anyone else has any other questions. We appreciate your candidness, your straightforwardness. It's true. Firefighters cut right to the chase. They don't BS. And I want to say I appreciate your thoroughness in just getting right to the point and just to the right to the meat of everything. I just wanted to make sure that the board had an opportunity to speak here before we move on here. I think the next step here, obviously, 1 second, Ms. Roy, would be to hear back from Chief Gauthier at a later date. But Ms. Roy, please.
That was going to be my question. Were we planning to enter into executive session tonight while we had him here, or schedule that for a different day?
Ms. Roy, we're going to have to do that at a different day at this point in time. There's some logistics on this that I wasn't aware of until tonight. Mr. Chief, if that was your intention when you were talking to me last week, and if I missed that, that's on me, no one else. But I believe this is something we can discuss at our next meeting next week on the 21st. And if Mr. Gauthier would be willing to come back for that meeting, we'll make sure that we have everything aligned and in place for him so we can have that discussion. Mr. Fazio?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think because of the seriousness of this discussion, the board should consider holding executive session before next week.
Okay. I will work that out tomorrow morning when the town office is open on scheduling. Does the board wish to have a meeting later this week? Okay, I'm seeing some heads nod. Does that work for you, Mr. Fazio? I know this week you're busy, so okay, great. All right, Mr. Gauthier, stay tuned. Mr. Prisby, sorry.
Yeah, so thank you. I agree with Mr. Fazio that this is of the utmost importance. Look, let me be plain here. We are, I'm not going to use the word crisis here, but I'm alarmed because I'm a member of this board and I know that the fire chief is going to retire as we sit here, as we speak, by July 31st. We had a conversation, I think, last week or the week prior about someone stepping in to fill his role. I've come to understand that that person's home is on the market and they are perhaps moving to the Cape, putting that plan potentially in flux. We have no fire inspector as of the 22nd. We haven't had a conversation about that yet. And now we have 3 fire captains, one of whom I believe is going to be leaving not long after Mickey leaves. So I think we need to move with a degree of haste here that we hadn't moved with before. And I appreciate the efforts that everybody's put into transitioning this to this point. But I feel like this board dropped the ball over the past 2 years. And I put that on myself as well. I'm frustrated that these plans happened over the course of the past 2 years since I've been on the board. And I'm having the most substantive conversations I've had about this in 2 years over the past week. And, I put that on myself. It's also frustrating to me that when I read the transition plan that I was presented with, there's not a whole lot of transitioning involved. Part of the transition plan suggests that the town administrator would offer Mr. Gauthier something, and the word would suggests that it hasn't happened yet. And now it's been 6 months since anybody had a conversation with the chief, and no offer has been made at all to retain him, and he is the most important cog in making all of this happen. So I think I know the town administrator is not here tonight, but Becca, if you could speak a little bit to what has gone on for the past 6 months that has led us to the point where we potentially don't have a fire inspector as of the 22nd, which is next week, and we don't have a fire chief potentially as of the 31st. I'd like to hear someone speak to that.
I don't have a lot more detail to give you other than what's in the memo. I would encourage everybody to read the memo in detail. It includes a lot of details. There's a lot of supplemental information attached to it. To be frank, I think that some of the facts have been a little misrepresented, and so I really encourage people to read the memo and the attachments thoroughly. With respect to the inspector, several months ago, we went through a process to try to hire an inspector. At that time, we didn't have a lot of funding in that line item, and unfortunately, the candidate that we wanted to bring on chose not to take the job at the end of the day, after a pretty thorough search process. So at that time, Steve was retiring. He retired, but he agreed to stay on to do inspections for us. That position has been posted this entire time. And I know that we received 2 applications in the last 2 weeks, but prior to that, we hadn't received any. So part of in terms of a transition for the inspector position, I know that next week, the board is going to have a contract before them. And I know Mickey's aware of this, and Steve, to bring on a contractor to do those inspections in the interim until we can figure out, what the next step is. If we want to put another ad out or try again for the fire inspector, we can do that. Now that we have more funding for that position because of the override, we might be able to attract, better candidates, more candidates, a bigger pool of candidates. So the contractor will help us in the interim. But there was another point. I mean, to be totally frank, I can't speak about the conversations that were had because unfortunately I didn't have those conversations. All I know is that there's a lot of detail laid out in the memo. There are attachments. Whatever the next step is, I just want to know what it is so we can move forward. And I'm open to having a conversation about that.
1 second, Mr. Prisby. Ms. Meekins, like I appreciate, it is impossible for you to comment on conversations that you weren't privy to. And I appreciate your candidness on that. And before we go a little bit further, guys, I don't want to stray too far away from the agenda item. I know these things are of paramount importance, and but I just want to make sure we're aware of what we're talking about here tonight. But Mr. Prisby, go ahead.
Yeah, so just a couple things, Mr. Chair. These are difficult conversations to have. Obviously, it's really awkward. It's uncomfortable, but it's an emergency, I think. And when we have these difficult conversations, if there are things that are said that someone disagrees with or a point of clarification that you need to make, then make that point of clarification. But one of the things that I want to get away from is this habit of saying, well, there are some things that were said that were misrepresented. Well, what are they then? Just say what they are so that I can have all the facts that I need to make a decision about how to move forward. Now, apparently we're going to be presented next week with a contract that's going to solve our inspector problem. I only learned about that because Mickey put in a letter saying he's going to retire on 31st. I would really prefer to have a conversation before I'm presented with signing a contract that we will need to sign on the 21st so that we have coverage going forward on the 22nd, okay? I don't understand why this isn't an agenda item previously. I don't understand why this is the first that I'm hearing of it because the chief is going to retire. I think that's all I have to say for right now, but I know that Mickey had his hand up.
Before we go on, Mr. Gothier, do you have anything?
A clarification on the inspection. First of all, I have the delegation of authority, so everything falls on me. So you can hire a firm all you want, but if I don't give the delegation of authority to do inspections, they can't do the inspections. And that's the way it works in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I get it from the state fire marshal. When I give the delegation of authority, it falls on me at the end of the day. So, I mean, doesn't matter. I mean, the firm doing it, if they're doing the inspection and something screws up and I gave the delegation of authority, the liability falls on me. So I want people that I know I can do. As for, like I said, I mean, if we can meet in executive session, I can resolve a lot of these issues if you wanted to move forward. And time is of the essence at this point, but I can resolve some of these issues as an inspection. So that's part of my proposal. And this only came to fruition today because I've been working on it and getting things in place and I can move forward. I mean, I can propose this, you can accept it, not accept it, and we move on. At the end of the day, I'm going out. I mean, one way or the other, I guess, but it's either sooner or later. And that's what my proposal will be.
Thanks, Chief.
Rebecca, I mean, you can hire a firm, you can pay $6,000, $7,000 a month or whatever it's going to be, but to do the inspections, it still has to come down to the fire chief. Right now, I'm the fire chief till July 31st, and delegation of authority falls on me. And then on August 1st, if there is a new fire chief, he has to get the delegation of authority from Peter Ostrowski, the state fire marshal, and then he can delegate the authority, and the liability will fall on that person. That's the clarification.
We've reached out to the state fire marshal's office as well, anticipating that we may have a gap and that we're going to have to fill it with a contractor. So I mean, To be frank, I'm not entirely sure what the alternative is at this time.
Yeah.
We have
And I've
inspections.
also talked to the marshal. I've had a good conversation with him about the delegation of authority, and he told me exactly how it works. So I've had
Okay, guys, I'm gonna
conversation.
interrupt this conversation right here. Ms. Meekins, I would assume that Chief Gauthier is being copied on all these correspondence before we go any forward. Just make sure, whatever developments are occurring, that Chief Gauthier is fully in the loop, even though there is a pending retirement at the end of the month. It is under the existing chiefs, from what I'm understanding, under their direction as well. So I encourage to collaborate for the time being with the existing chief. But before we go to you, Mr. Mead, I had Ms. Roy with her hand up, so I just want to give her a chance.
So we keep hearing what pressing time it is, and it is very pressing that we get to this. Tonight we do have posted under executive session strategy for negotiation. I guess I just wanted to ask again, is there any reason why we just can't go into executive session tonight, seeing how, next week if Mr. Gauthier is on vacation, next week we're going to be losing our fire inspector. It just seems like we really should consider tonight.
Ms. Roy, that's on me as the chair. I need to make sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's when we go into executive session. And, I've said this before, the only shortcuts I want to take is posting the agenda, not getting into a meeting and getting into any type of issue that may open us up. So I need to get that direction from a couple of people, and I'm looking to turn this around by tomorrow morning. So I understand that the urgency is there. I hope that the chief, Ms. Meekins, and Mr. Mead, and everyone else who's in this room and everyone who's listening understands that that is a priority that I'm taking away with tonight, and that you give me at least until tomorrow to come up with a plan to when and how we can have a meeting, and then what purpose are we going to have that meeting, and can we have it for that purpose? So I need to go through those tests, and I need to make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's. Stay tuned. Okay. Is there any other questions for Chief Gauthier? Mr. Fazio.
Mr. Chairman, do you want me to read what's in the Q&A if the discussion is over? Okay. So we just have 4 questions and comments. Justin Wood, in appreciation, Doreen suggesting taking this agenda out of order. Marilyn, who should have given Chief a copy of the plan? So, I think any of us could have given Chief a copy of the plan. I think it's a public document, but he should have been, emailed a copy. Ethel Herrick, this is Ethel Jaggy, 34, Adams Road. I would like to say thank you, Chief Gauthier, for your service to the town. 47 years is a long time. Thank you. And then just a comment that says, okay, good. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fazio. Mr. Mead, I'm sorry, you did have your hand up after Ms. Roy. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'm just going to, Peter, I'm going to be a little blunt.
Not you.
Yeah, unbelievable. I'm going to be a little blunt. We're all in a world of crap, and we don't have a plan B. And I have to echo what Ed said, is that this has been going on for a long time, and we don't have any solutions. And in 16 days, we're not going to have a fire chief, and maybe not a captain, and not an inspector, and maybe not a deputy chief. Ladies and gentlemen, I would encourage you to resolve this problem tonight. Not tomorrow, not next week, tonight. Get it done. We went into this. There's no plan B. Right now, Mickey's leaving, and we're all in a crap. So let's get out of it, okay? Let's just get it done tonight, and that's about as blunt as I can be tonight.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just one final comment.
Yes.
I think Ed asked this question, and I think I may have just not answered it, so I apologize. But I know there's been some question about what happens if, if Mickey does choose to move forward with his retirement. It's my understanding that there have been conversations inside the department with the current deputy chief, and that he's prepared to step in as acting chief with the support of the captains. So that's obviously a plan that we would fully support. I just wanted to make that known.
Mr. Frisbee?
Chair, I hate to do this to you, but I got to make a motion that we move into executive session for the purpose of contract negotiations with the current fire chief.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded to go into executive session. Do I have the section in which that you're going under? Is it option 1, 2, 3? Mr.
Give me a
Frisbee?
second.
Thank you.
Mr. Carlson, can I just, an administrative point?
Yes.
In order for us to do this, to move into executive session on this Zoom session, I have to remove all of the attendees. Zoom does not allow those attendees to come back into the room, which means they will be unable to view.
Okay.
I just wanted to.
That's a good point. Mr. Frisbee, while you're looking that up, I'm going to hold off on your motion to enter executive session right at this point in time. I will ask Chief Gauthier if he would please remain on the meeting and just stick with us while we get through a couple of other business items. I don't anticipate approving minutes and a couple of these other things to take all that amount of time. If the committee would like to pass over anything on the agenda on new business, with the exception of B, I'd be more than willing in D, I'd be more than willing to do so. Okay, I'm not getting any objections from the board.
No.
Okay, thank you for that. Stand by for a moment. We'll just get through the rest of some of this agenda. So we have under new business, we're going to switch back to that under section B. Vote to sign contract with Lauren Goldberg for audit of the June 23rd, 2020 election process. We have in front of us tonight an agreement, right, Ms. Meekins? Did you want to give an update to the board on what it pertains?
Sure. So this is a continuation of the discussion that we had last week. Jane Kramer, Town Council, did reach out to Lauren Goldberg of KP Law. She has provided a proposal at $300 an hour to do the audit of the town election, which occurred on the 23rd of June. She's prepared to get started ASAP if the board chooses to move forward.
Any questions from the board? Ms. Meekins, I do have a question about the agreement. Is there a not to exceed amount included in this?
There's not a not to exceed included in the proposal. I, to be honest, don't really have an idea how long it's going to take her. She didn't really give us any indication. I know that she's a professional and that she does this often. This is her specialty. So I don't anticipate that it would take long. If the board wished to include a not to exceed, that would just mean that we would have to come back if we were to reach that point and make a decision about how to move forward. So.
Thank you. Just real quick, administratively, ladies and gentlemen, I was just reminded that there is Ed's motion is still active to enter an executive session. Mr. Frisbee, would you please consider retracting that motion if it's agreeable by whoever seconded it, please, so we can move on with the rest of the agenda?
I will. Yes.
I agree.
Thank you. Okay, appreciate that. As we're going through this, Ms. Meekins, I noticed the billable amount. The one thing I'm concerned about is just, how much can we anticipate that will be spent? I want to get to the answers and allow Ms. Goldberg to provide her assessment, but I'm really hesitant to kind of sign an open-ended agreement for this. If we need to go for more money, I would like to set a not to exceed amount, and if they need to come back and sign some more money, personally, I'm fine with that. But I have a hard time with doing that.
Yeah, that's fine, if the board wants to do that. If you have a dollar figure in mind, I'm sure that won't be an issue for her.
So if I may, to the board, just doing a calculation of 300 an hour for 40 hours, that's 12, not to exceed 12,000 would be 40 hours. I didn't know how the board felt about setting a cap for this. If I'm by myself, I'll just, I'll be quiet. But I wanted to get the feedback from you, the rest of the board members.
That seems about right, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Opton, Mr. Fazio, Ms. Roy, do you have any comments on that?
Yep, I'd agree.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. All right. So any questions on, now that I kind of got the math out of the way there, is there any questions on the, that you can ask some speakers about what's to be delivered here? If you're not, if you're all set, I'll entertain a motion as long as you can set in there not to exceed $12,000.
Should I include that in the motion?
Yes, please.
Okay. I move the board vote to authorize the chairman to sign the terms of engagement letter with KP Law for an audit on June 23rd, 2020 election project with the inclusion of not to exceed $12,000.
Second.
I have a motion made and second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor by roll call vote. Ms. Roy?
Roy, aye.
Mr. Fazio? Oh, you went on.
Sorry, Fazio, aye.
Thank you. Mr. Prisby?
Frisbee, aye.
Mr. Often?
Often, aye.
Mr. Carlson, I declare the motion carried 5-0. Thank you very much. Did we want to pass over, vote to finalize charge and create a local tax relief program committee tonight, or do we want to bring that up? I didn't get a direction. Mr. Prisby?
So, Mr. Chair, we could pass this over. I think that what I want to do is I want to put this on as a discussion item because obviously the membership of the Taxation Aid Committee would include the chair of the Board of Assessors, the town treasurer, and some members at large. As far as the chair of the Board of Assessors and the town treasurer goes, I feel like we ought to have a conversation with them before we start adding to their job description. So if we could put that on for a discussion item for another time and then invite them in to have that discussion, that'd be good.
All right, thank you for that. Was the rest of the board okay with that? Thank you. All right, moving on to new business on D, one-day beer and wine license for VFW Post, 1497, 25 Main Street, South Grafton, July 19, 2020, for the annual VFW scholarship event.
I move the board vote to grant a one-day beer and wine license to the VFW Post 1497 for their annual VFW scholarship event to be held at 25 Main Street in South Grafton on July 19th, 2020, contingent upon the VFW Post 1497 obtaining a food permit for the event.
Second.
I have a motion made in second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none. All those by roll call vote. Ms. Roy?
Roy, aye.
Mr. Fazio?
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Prisby? Nope. I believe we lost Mr. Prisby. Could someone make a note of time? 8:33. Mr. Prisby is not attending. Mr. Often?
Often, aye.
And Mr. Carlson, I declare the motion carried 4-0. Thank you. Real quick, we have 3 sets of meeting minutes that need to be approved for June 2nd, July 2nd, and July 7th.
We did have correspondence tonight too.
Oh man, okay. I'm so sorry about that, Colleen.
Okay.
We're kind of all over the place tonight with the agenda.
Nope,
Thanks for
that's fine.
keeping me aligned. If you want to go ahead and read the correspondence.
Yep, we received 4 pieces of correspondence this past week. Ethel Jaggi requested to be added to the agenda for the next select board meeting for a formal status update on the Adams Road reconstruction project. Jeff Turgeon writes concerning the Grafton-Upton Railroad liquid propane transfer station. He requests operation at the facility be stopped while Grafton is without a fire chief and fire inspector. Susan Mills wrote a letter expressing her dissatisfaction with the handling of the fire chief's job posting. And Ronald Battery of the Federal Railroad Administration acknowledged the receipt of the Select Board's letter of support for the Grafton-Upton Railroad's Christie grant applications. That's all.
Thank you for that. And real quick, I did pass over select board reports and TA reports. Becca, did you just want to go through that real quick and give us a quick update on the listed items?
Sure. So 25 Worcester Street, we've ordered the title exam, we're still awaiting results. Once we get the results from the title exam, the deed will be drafted for execution by the board. After June's at least 2 weeks out. Recruitment and hiring, we did first round interview for the town accountant position last week. We're preparing to do a second round next week. We're gonna try to do it in person, which obviously will require the distancing thresholds be met. Today we posted the data collector position in the assessor's office. It was previously posted internally as a union position. We're gonna hopefully start reviewing those applications August 1st. Ken O'Brien left us to be the town assessor in the town of Uxbridge. For July 21st, an agreement has been reached on Adams Road drainage for the design and the easement donation from David Kelly, who owns a property at 8 Adams. So next week, the board will do a temporary easement agreement to execute, as well as request to the board to lift the affordable restriction on the lot that the easement is going through. There'll also be 2 agreements at some point between 2 other neighbors. Will be need to devote some property to do some of the construction. So those agreements are still in the works. I mentioned the contract for inspection services earlier, so we'll be preparing that for the board. We've had no new COVID cases over the last 3 days, so that's good. And just today, I found out, I didn't have time to post it, obviously, because I found out today that MJ's Market received their provisional license from the CCC last week. So they're going to be attending development team meeting this week to discuss what the next step is. That's all I have.
Any select board member reports tonight? Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, now let's move on to meeting minutes for June 2nd, 2020. And I need a motion to approve meeting minutes.
I motion we approve June 2nd, 2020 meeting minutes, July 2nd, 2020 meeting minutes, and July 7th, 2020 meeting minutes.
Going for the trifecta, Colleen. Like it. Do I have a motion to approve meeting minutes for June 2nd, July 2nd, and I'm sorry, July 7th, 2020. Do I have a second? There's no second. Ms. Roy, would you read them probably one at a time, please?
Sure.
Motion for the first one. Thank you.
I move we vote to approve the meeting minutes on June 2nd, 2020.
Second.
Motion made and second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none.
Yeah,
All those,
just briefly, Mr. Carlson, just briefly. On June 2nd, 2020, we had a pretty in-depth discussion about appointments to the Community Preservation Committee. And a lot of my discussion about Britt Paget is in here, which is good. A week before, there was a lot of discussion about appointing Dan Kusher to the Affordable Housing Trust. That didn't make the minutes, and I should have said something at the time, but I'm just bringing this up now to make sure that if we're getting the back and forth for the conversations, that we get all the back and forth for the conversations. That's all.
thank you. I'll bring that up tomorrow morning with staff. Thank you. Any further discussion on the June 2nd meeting minutes as presented? Hearing none. All those by roll call vote. Ms. Roy?
Roy, aye.
Mr. Fazio?
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Often?
Often abstain.
Mr. Frisbee?
Frisbee, aye.
Mr. Carlson's aye. Declare the motion carried 4-0 with 1 abstention. Next up, I have July 2nd.
I move the board vote to approve July 2nd, 2020 meeting minutes.
Second.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the July 2nd meeting minutes? All right, hearing none, all those by roll call vote. Ms. Roy,
Roy, I.
Mr. Fazio,
Fazio, I.
Mr. Often,
Often I.
Mr. Prisby.
Frisbee, aye.
Thank you. One last one here, July 7, 2020.
I move the board vote to approve the July 7th, 2020 meeting minutes.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor by roll call vote. Ms. Roy,
Roy, I.
Mr. Fazio,
Fazio, I.
Mr. Often,
Often I.
Mr. Prisby,
Frisbee, aye.
Peter Carlson's aye. Thank you. Declare motion carried. Okay, so before we go into executive session, we're going to go under option 2, Mr. Prisby. Am I correct? Okay, so this is
That
gonna
was
be
my
for the-
analysis as well, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And this will be, we will motion go into executive session. The motion needs to read that we only go back, I'll read that part about it when we go into session. If you want to go ahead and read the language into the record.
Mr. Chair, I move that we move into executive session for option 2 under the open meeting law to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
I have a motion made and second to go into executive session. This will be for the purposes of non-union negotiation, correct? So all those in favor for going into executive session, Ms. Roy,
Roy, I.
Mr. Fazio,
Fazio, I.
Mr. Often,
Often I.
Mr. Prisby,
Frisbee, aye.
Peter Carlson's aye. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We will only be reconvening in open session for the purposes of adjournment. I want to thank you all tonight. Have a good evening.